Welcome to One Obsession at a Time. I am your host, Anastasia Lara, and this month we are diving into alternate day fasting. This is episode 2 in this current obsession, and so far I've covered what is ADF, why I want to do it, what drove my obsession, and today is a book episode. So I love reading, generally because I am quite a busy person. I run another small business. I have 3 children. Most of my reading is done at nighttime. So if there is a Kindle version of a book, I am probably reading it. So today is a book episode. It's not a summary and it's not a review. I'm going to read you some paraphrased excerpts, so not always exactly the excerpt because they might be quite long, from the fasting books that have shaped how I'm doing ADF right now. And then I'll tell you how I actually implemented what I learned and what shifted when I did. So let's start with the gateway drug of fasting books, and that is Delay, Don't Deny by Gin Stephens. Gin Stephens is probably one of the OG fasting gurus. She is actually a teacher who discovered fasting and set up quite a popular Facebook group, which I think has now been moved over to a different platform. And she has a fantastic podcast as well. But Delay, Don't Deny was the book that made fasting feel possible instead of being extreme. I do remember when I was younger, my mum saying to me, I said, I just really need to lose some weight. And mum saying to me, well, just don't eat for a day. And back in the 90s, that was really not the way that we were taught growing up as teenage girls. We were taught to eat healthily. That was sort of like, isn't that like restrictive or disordered eating? It just didn't feel right. But this first book, Delay, Don't Deny, because you're not denying yourself, you're just delaying it, made it feel possible. So one of the ideas that Gin drives home is that when you stop tasting and snacking and sipping flavoured things all day, your hunger cues finally reset. Hunger is meant to come and go. You're not supposed to be in a permanent state of feed me or I will die. When I read that, I had a minor identity crisis because I realised I hadn't actually been hungry in a very long time. I'd just been constantly responding to urges that I'd trained into myself. So I've always said to my husband that I really do like fasting, and fasting is good for me because the later I can eat in a day, the better. And the reason for that is because once I start eating, those floodgates have opened. I will continue to graze and drink and nibble and then eat again, and I will do that all day, probably until dinner. I'm really good. I am not a nighttime snacker. So once I've had dinner and maybe dessert, then I will stop eating. But the floodgates were always opened. And so fasting has been so good for me in that respect. So Gin also talks about fasting as relief. It's not deprivation. So when you're not eating all day long, your body finally has the space to do some maintenance work instead of digesting food forever. And this was such a mental flip for me. I'd always thought fasting was taking something away, and suddenly it read like giving my body a break so that it can repair itself. And that's a very different emotional experience. I'm not denying myself anything. I'm actually giving my body the chance to rest and repair itself. Honestly, the emotional experience matters more than the science for me. If something feels like a punishment, I will eventually rebel. But if it feels like relief, I'll keep doing it. From there, I moved on to Jin's other book, Feast, Fast, Repeat, which is like the second degree of fasting education. The big idea that stuck from that one is that fasting is not a perfection sport. It's a pattern sport. One messy day isn't the problem, it's quitting. And that really played into my realization that everything that people are good at in life, successful people, it all comes down to consistency. So you could have someone who drives the longest golf ball in the world, but if they can't do that every tournament they play, they're not going to be top 10. If you are going to eat perfectly on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but you can't maintain it Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, then you're not going to be successful doing that. So consistency, the person that sends out an email to their email followers every month is more successful than the person who does it every week for 6 weeks and then doesn't do it again for 3 months. So consistency is really important. So Jin said that the job is not to white knuckle every fast into perfection, but the job is to come back to the rhythm again and again. And that one idea is probably the reason I didn't abandon ADF the first time I sort of had a relapse, if that makes sense, or I broke a fast early. In every other diet attempt of my life, that one off day meant that I had to start again on Monday, which secretly meant that I'm never going to do it again. I always had this idea that I had used up my willpower. Like I have like this well of willpower, and I think I still actually believe this, that once it's used up for an activity, it's really hard for me to reactivate that again. Anyway, yeah, so that's where I am with that. But Jin has really pushed the idea that consistency and coming back to it again and again is really important. So that's why I did decide to give it another go. Okay, let's talk about the next book that is ruling over this current round of obsession, and it's Intermittent Fasting for Women by Megan Ramos. And I really like Megan because she's worked really closely with Jason Fung, who is the doctor who tested intermittent fasting on his diabetes patients and made the connection between reducing insulin to weight loss, which I think is really important. There's so much there that shows us that every time we're feeding our insulin and our insulin spikes is that we are causing weight gain and preventing weight loss. So I thought that was really cool. So Megan's book, Intermittent Fasting for Women, explained something nobody else had really bothered to do, and it was women do not respond to fasting like smaller men. We are not just little men. We are wired to protect hormonal stability first and then our weight loss second. That means if fasting is layered on top of stress, sleep debt and chaos, the body treats it as a threat. So you cannot add fasting onto a lifestyle that is not working in your best favour. You need to have all of those other layers of self-care working for you. Whereas, men can have the high-powered job and go to the gym every day and do all these stresses and be the 5 a.m. club and do all this sort of stuff and put fasting on top of that, and yes, they'll lose weight. We're not wired that way. We need to layer our fasting on a foundation of stability. So predictable eating windows, added minerals, rest. It works with your biology instead of against it when you have the right foundation. So that instantly changed how I started ADF. Instead of treating it like a competition with myself, so can I last longer? How long can I last? I started thinking, how do I lower the stress load so my body actually does the repair work instead of panicking? Megan also says something I quote to myself weekly: when stress is high, the answer is not to fast harder, it's to fast gently. And that one line stopped me from doing that classic self-sabotage move where life is already stressful and I decide to add voluntary hunger like a side quest. So this week, for example, I'm second week in, and this is my fifth. This was meant to be my fifth down day, which means not eating today. I got to about 1 p.m, 18 hours in, and I was just hungry. Maybe I was a little bit bored. I can say that now that I've eaten, but at the time I just felt hungry, and I'm actually on the second or the third day of my period, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to show myself a little bit of grace and I'm going to eat today, because past Anastasia would have been happy with an 18-hour fast, and I'm just going to take this as an 18-hour fast. Yeah, so after reading those books, here's what I actually changed. The first thing I did was remove the idea that fasting days have to be heroic. I decided ahead of time which days were fasting days, so I wasn't negotiating with myself at 11 a.m. when I was bored and near a kitchen. Pre-deciding that removed 90% of the mental wrestling. I also implemented a clean fast, so no lemon water, no Diet Coke. It was just black coffee, plain water, sparkling water, sometimes black tea. And the difference that made was really good. Within a week, my hunger was quieter and I really wasn't thinking about food all day. So today was probably the first time when I have felt like I've needed to eat before my window, and food was actually it was really at the front of my mind. So that's why I sort of caved today. On eating days, I stopped trying to eat perfectly, and instead I just tried to eat normally. So I wasn't trying to implement any other diets. I wasn't trying to restrict my eating in any way. I am still eating what I want on my feast days. That said, I do stop eating at dinner time. So I might have dessert, but I certainly don't eat in front of the TV. Like I don't have chips or chocolate late at night or any of that. My dinner time is my last eating time for the day. Another thing that changed was I changed how I talk to myself on fasting days. So instead of being negative, I was really positive and was able to identify a wave of hunger and knowing that would pass, and to be able to talk myself through that. And 9 times out of 10, the hunger passes. It really does. I also noticed that going to bed earlier on fasting days was like a big hack, because if I stayed awake scrolling, I was then, sleep deprived the next day, which makes me hungrier. But also, I love the idea of sleeping through a lot of my fasting hours. And sleep is also healing. So there's sort of a double benefit there. So now I sort of treat a reasonable bedtime as part of the protocol. It's not an optional bonus. I paid attention to the practical triggers as well, like just wandering into the kitchen to check something, making sure I wasn't just hanging out there, And yeah, it's not my hangout place anymore. The biggest practical change I got, and I got this from Megan Ramos, was not fasting harder when life was already stressful. So as I said, today I broke my fast. I'm on the second or third day of my period, and I actually just thought I'm going to give myself some grace today, and I'm going to stop at 18 hours, and that's fine. Tomorrow I'm going to jump back on to a 36-hour fast. So what did I actually do? Just a little bit of a wrap. The things that I did was I pre-decided that I was going to have a fasting day, and I just said, this is it, it's a fasting day. And I led through the day with acceptance of that. I implemented clean fasts. I had normal eating on my eating days, no restrictions. That doesn't mean I would allow myself to go crazy, because I'm also mindful of the fact that I don't want to undo all of my hard work. I don't want it to be for nothing. But I'm going to eat normally. I'm going to protect my sleep, stay out of the kitchen, and then obviously when things are a bit more stressful, is giving myself a little bit more grace on that. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for today. We've looked at the books that built this obsession and how I actually translated those ideas into real behaviour. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about some of the smaller details, like the rules that I follow, the things that I ignore, things that are making it easy for me, and just some tips that I've learned so far on this fasting journey. See you next time.